Welcome, data center professionals from all around the globe, to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and I'm thrilled to welcome you, regardless of where you sit on a go-to-market team. Perhaps you're in sales, marketing, account management, product, channel partnerships, or perhaps you're the executive leader that brings all of this great stuff together. And regardless of where you sit within the digital infrastructure, within the data center ecosystem, perhaps you work for a data center operator, maybe you have to do something related to hyperscale or co-location, edge or modular, or perhaps you're from a technology or a facilities related company in and around the digital infrastructure ecosystem. Perhaps you do something related to construction or real estate, or raising capital, or outsource sales and marketing. But regardless of what your company does in and around data centers, digital infrastructure, or critical facilities, and regardless of what your client-facing role is, if you are serious about elevating your game, including your own growth, your team's growth, your company's growth, you are for sure in the right place. To make sure that you're notified about upcoming live streams just like this, be sure to subscribe to our weekly data center sales and marketing newsletter that you can sign up for directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. And that comes directly to your email inbox on Sundays. So what is on the agenda for this week? That is a great question. First, we're going to start by looking at how a private cloud and data center services company can effectively prospect and generate leads. Then we'll turn our attention to how a data center maintenance and cleaning company can compete in a price war. After that, we'll talk about how a data center co-location provider can find the right marketers who understand their business. Then we'll take a quick break for a message from our sponsor. After that, in the second half of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show, we'll talk about how to get in front of data center real estate, DCRE investors, how a co-location provider can compete against big cloud providers with infrastructure as a service, disaster recovery, backup, and networking as a service. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's show, we'll talk about how to scale data center industry-specific financial audit and assurance services. So without any further delay, let's jump into this week's first question. How does a private cloud and data center services company effectively prospect and generate leads? So your company is principally in the business of selling private cloud services and more broadly data center services, and you want to get better at prospecting and generating leads. That's a fantastic question and a great place to start. The reason why it's a great place to start is I see a lot of small and mid-sized companies with those business models facing a lot of pressure around commoditization. There's a tremendous amount of great things going on in the industry right now. For example, you've probably heard Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, talk about how he's expecting $1 trillion in data center upgrades over the next 4 years. And you've likely heard Michael Dell's forecast of 100-fold growth in data center demand over the next decade. And that's all well and good. But we know that what data center operators and enterprise clients are looking for is in many cases a higher level of density than has ever historically been possible. And with that higher level of density comes a lot more power requirements, a lot more cooling requirements for needs around artificial intelligence, AI, and high performance computing, supercomputing. And with that, it's going to face a lot of pressure. It's going to put a lot of pressure on legacy data center facilities from data center operators that were built in the 2010s and that are more than a year or two old. So the challenge with all of that is understanding where you can win. And in order to understand where you can win, it's a combination of looking at historically where your company has been most successful, what kind of clients have gotten the most value from working with you in the past, and where your product roadmap takes you in the next 6, 12, 24 months or so in terms of new investments coming online to better serve your existing and future clients. So this is just as much a product strategy, a product roadmap conversation as it is a prospecting and lead generation conversation. So we need to take both of those factors in account, both looking a little back in our rearview mirror of where we've historically been the most successful. You'll probably see some clues about this on your case studies page, on your logos, sitting in your CRM, your customer relationship management system, and where you think you're going to be most successful in the coming months and in the coming years with your new investments that are about to come online, with new facilities that are under construction, new partnerships, new lease agreements with perhaps in other data center operators' facilities where you're renting out retail or wholesale space, whatever it is. With that in mind, we need to back into an ideal client profile. We need to document what kinds of companies on a very specific basis we're looking to improve our prospecting and lead generation for. With that in mind, especially when it comes to private cloud and data center services, let's first get clear on geographically where these clients are located. Why is that incredibly important? Because for a company that sells data center services and private cloud, that's a data center operator, it's very likely that in one or more geographic regions where you do business, there are some compliance or certification requirements that you'll need to meet, that you will need to meet in order to do business there, period, or in order to do business with certain kinds of clients. So let's first be clear about geographically where you historically have been most successful and where you believe you will be most successful in the coming months and in the coming years. For a lot of single location operators, there's usually a playbook for hyperlocal, meaning the prospecting and leads that happen with businesses that are drivable, within a 30 to 60 minute drive of where you're located. And then there may be a national or global playbook for companies that are located way outside your geographic region, but specifically need or want to have a presence where you specifically are. Either they need that presence for governance reasons, or they need that presence for disaster recovery reasons, or edge or latency reasons, or something along those lines. By the way, one thing that not a lot of people are talking about is that some of these legacy colocation operators that don't envision having massive infrastructure upgrades in the coming years, while it's possible that they may face obsolescence pressure, it's also equally possible that they could transform themselves or pivot, or at least pivot part of their facility to focus on edge needs, because all of a sudden they now have a proximity advantage, even if they can't win on purely density advantages. Anyway, it's more of a business model conversation. So in your ideal client profile, get clear about geographically where they're located. It's also really important to understand what company size you can win most often with. This is a big issue around self-awareness that I know a lot of companies in this space struggle with as well. What sized companies have historically you done best with? Again, looking at your case studies, your logos, your CRM, and be really, really clear about that. When we're really clear about that, we can pick a range, a bottom end of the range and a top end of the range for the smallest companies where you can be most successful and the largest companies where you can be most successful. That's a big one, and I think an area that a lot of people don't think enough about, because for most companies that are providing private cloud and data center related services, there usually is a minimum size company that they need to be to actually be able to afford your minimum level, your minimum program. Along the same lines, there's also usually an upper end of the range where it may be prohibitively difficult to serve a client with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees, like a Fortune 500 or Fortune 50 client, because they have such outrageously burdensome requirements on a compliance and certification side, and perhaps on a financial side or length of sales cycle, whatever it is. So usually I encourage people to be thinking of like Goldilocks, not too big, not too hot, not too cold, not too big, not too small, to get clarity around a range of number of employees. And I know typically when it comes to data center services and private cloud, you may be conditioned to thinking in terms of kilowatts, megawatts, square footage, square meters. The reality, though, is if you're going to do prospecting and lead generation, inevitably you're going to be in a platform like LinkedIn that allows you to do your queries, do your filtering based on number of employees, the number of employee headcount in that particular company. Let's also, while we're defining your ideal client profile for your prospecting and lead generation, let's get clear about what industries or what business models you historically have done best with. And again, this comes back to what I mentioned a few moments ago about geographic region plus who they are, what their company does. Like, for example, if you work with financial services companies, or you work with healthcare companies, or you work with governments, or you work with education, in many geographic regions, there are unique and non-trivial compliance and certification that you're going to need to invest in to be successful in marketing and selling and servicing those kinds of clients. So that needs to be baked into your ideal client profile, especially when it comes to your prospecting and lead generation. Otherwise, your prospecting could be really off the mark and you'll have no idea of what's qualified and what's not. So once you have defined the company in your ICP, your ideal client profile, so you know geographically roughly what company size range they're in terms of number of employees and what industries you're in pretty good shape with the company side. From there, for prospecting and lead generation, I'd encourage you to build out a target account list. So you have a finite list of anywhere from it could be as few as a couple dozen. Usually for most companies that would be doing prospecting and lead generation, even with a modestly sized team, they probably have at least a couple hundred companies on that list. For much larger companies or much wider addressable markets, you might have a few thousand companies on a target account list to run account-based marketing, account-based selling. And that will give your prospecting and lead generation a lot more focus, because then all of a sudden it becomes way easier to use tools like LinkedIn Sales Navigator or LinkedIn Campaign Manager or ZoomInfo or any one of dozens of other tools in this space that could be effective for doing cold outbound prospecting. I'm partial to LinkedIn because nearly everyone knows how to use it. Nearly everyone has access to it. It's a really standardized way of getting your go-to-market teams aligned around the same common database. And in terms of like the recency, how current it is, there's been a running joke for many years in this space that when you change jobs, first you tell your spouse or your significant other, and the second person you tell is LinkedIn. That's how fresh and relevant most of the data is there, and that's the argument for starting there first. So that will help you at a company level. What about the individuals within those companies? For the individuals within the companies, we need to understand, again, going back to your logos, your case studies, your CRM, who historically have you engaged with? Who's been the most important kind of stakeholders that you work with early, middle, end of sales process and post-purchase? That will help you figure out your buyer persona strategy, your targeting, your segmentation strategy. And the most important kind of stakeholder that you want to build relationships with, educate and build trust with, you'll want to call a primary buyer persona. The second most important category of stakeholder to build relationships with, to educate and build trust with in the context of private cloud and data center services, we'll call that person a secondary buyer persona. And perhaps in a complex sale, large mid-market or enterprise sales, there'd be a third category of stakeholder. We might call that a tertiary buyer persona. And once you've identified and prioritized who's most important, second most important, perhaps third most important, you may even come up with a negative buyer persona, a certain category of stakeholder that when they show up, it completely derails everything. But at any rate, at least for your primary and secondary, then you're going to want to set about doing a little bit of customer insight research to make sure that your messaging aligns with what is top of mind for them. Not what you would like to be top of mind for them, but what actually is top of mind for them. What's going on in their world? How can you have extreme empathy and understanding about what their biggest goals are that they're trying to achieve individually, as a team, as a company? Along the same lines, what are their biggest challenges? What are their biggest stressors? What is driving them nuts? What's causing them to have to pull all-nighters? What's messing up their downtime with friends and family and loved ones? What screwed up their last vacation because it caused it to be anything but a vacation when they were constantly being bugged about problems that were going wrong back at work? Once you have consensus on that in their own words, you document that into a buyer persona blueprint, buyer persona document, or whatever you have, and that will drive all of your strategy around content and educational events. And in a self-driven buyer's journey, where your prospects really don't want to meet your sales team till they're just about ready to purchase, historically, you might have said content, schmontent, that's marketing's job. And if you're in marketing and you're watching that, you know for sure that sales was typically very dismissive of this stuff and not very participatory in the past. In a self-driven buyer's journey, where as much as 83% of their journey, 83% of the sales cycle may be over before your sales team gets to meet a prospect, it is no longer a good idea for sales to completely shut down and completely avoid getting involved in the early and middle stages of the journey. On the contrary, most account executives, most sales development professionals should be working very closely with their marketing and events team to take an active role in being seen more as teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, and even some of the people on your team may be seen as thought leaders. A good back of the napkin to think about is sales professionals really need to come in much earlier in the buyer's journey than they ever have previously in their career. And marketers need to be prepared to go much deeper into the buyer's journey than they ever have had to do in their career, even going post-purchase deep into working with account managers and product managers and channel partnership managers. We could actually do a whole session just on that. But at the end of the day, it's super important to think about what your company can do to stop showing up as a vendor and instead show up as an expert. That's the key to having an active role in that first 83% of the buyer's journey when all of the purchase preferences are formed. Most research has found that there's now 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, especially with infrastructure having to do with like private cloud and data center services. For most companies in this space, they're lucky if they have one or two or three of those 28 touch points, even when they spend outrageously large amounts of money at big national and global conferences. Only one or two or three of those 28 touch points. And that is a massive liability if you don't figure out a way to get back in there to earn your way in the early and middle stages of the journey when you have a chance to influence how your prospects and clients navigate their journey and form the purchase criteria that they're going to use to compare you against everyone else. Because if you only show up at the end, more than likely what has happened is your prospects and clients have been spending a ton of time with someone that you compete with. And it's just a matter of whether that someone is a direct competitor, an indirect competitor, or a non-business model competitor. But make no mistake, once you understand your buyer personas, you're going to figure out all of the things that they need to learn to close the gaps and achieve their goals and fix the things that are driving them nuts and potentially sabotaging them and their teams and their company. And the more active of a role you can take in showing up and looking more like a big four consultant and less like a commission-hungry vendor salesperson, the better off things get. For a lot of companies, this is a massive culture change, which is why in many cases, depending on your company's size, you may need your executive sponsor to literally be your CEO. Now, if you work for a huge company with thousands of employees, more than likely, like your chief commercial officer, your chief revenue officer, your chief marketing officer, they can be the big executive sponsor of this kind of initiative. But it really does need to start at a super high level within your company for someone drawing a line in the sand and saying, we are tired of losing these deals to the competition. We are tired of being ignored. We're tired of being second guessed. We're tired of being haggled on price and having our margins disappear. We're tired of not being able to afford world-class talent. Going forward, it is our priority to be seen as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with our category, private cloud and data center services. We're going to make that a critically important part of who we hire. We're going to make that a critically important part of what we do with new employee onboarding and reskilling and professional development and certification. We need to make sure that we show up more as a concierge and a tour guide rather than a traditional sales development rep, because we have the insight, we have the pattern recognition, we have the muscle memory of working with lots of clients just like this, but we need to do a better job of communicating how we can help our clients throughout the full buyer's journey, not just when they pull out their credit card. Because by the time they pull out their credit card, if you're just meeting them, in most cases, it's too late. When you do this well and you stay with your prospects and clients throughout their full buyer's journey, you will find that education and trust building, that relationship building, nearly guarantees you to stay on the short list. And in many cases, you'll find that they're spending so much time with members of your client-facing team that competitors drop out of the short list. They're eliminated because your prospects and clients are getting such ridiculous value from hanging around your subject matter experts that there is no need to look elsewhere for answers to their biggest goals, for fixing their biggest challenges. And they get to the decision stage and you're pretty much it. You've largely won. That's what you should be thinking about if you're a private cloud or data center services company and you want to effectively prospect and generate leads. Because those interactions, of course, from a tactical perspective, this might look like email newsletters, educational webinars, educational offline webinars, ones that are held in your facility in a conference room or a training room where you're teaching or going on the road and doing the same thing. That's the key part with all of this. You can't cabana party your way or golf tournament your way to teaching. Unless you're in the golf business, you're probably not doing a lot of education when you're out on the unless you're bringing your PowerPoints with you on the golf cart. So all of those certainly have a place of reinforcing and cross-pollinating your happiest clients with your prospects. But when it comes to the most basic of basics, the bread and butter, the foundation of all of this, it's education and building trust in a way that's hyper relevant for who they are and what's going on in their professional lives. And the better job you can do with adding value, the more likely it is that they want to spend time with you. So instead of spending all of your energy begging for meetings, begging for attention, trying all of these cheesy things to get in front of them, it's actually the tables are flipped. They actually want to spend time with you because they're learning so much and they view your company as an integral part of addressing anything and everything that has to do with private cloud and their need for data center services. Next question up is, this is a great one. This is from a data center maintenance and cleaning company. So how does a data center maintenance and cleaning company compete in a price war? How does a data center maintenance and cleaning company compete in a price war? And I can tell you firsthand, from having worked with companies just like that many of them do compete in a brutal price war. It is a tough category. And if you don't have a way to be seen as anything more than those labels as a maintenance and cleaning company, you're going to be forced to compete on price, which is a really crappy way to grow a business. It impacts your margins. It impacts your ability, who you can hire, who you can retain. It causes a lot of morale problems, and it may even threaten the survival of your company. With that in mind, what can you do a little bit differently that gets you out of price competition, that gets you out of the vendor box for a data center maintenance and cleaning company? Well, we need to really understand a couple of things. One is put your product manager hat on, and we need to understand the job to be done. What are our clients really hiring us to do? When we dig beneath the surface level definition of how they currently view us today, why do they invest in data center maintenance? Why do they invest in data center cleaning? If you've ever heard of the 5 whys, WHY apostrophe S, the five, you just keep asking why and why and why and why and why, like a toddler would, right? To keep digging deeper and deeper and peeling away layers and layers of the onion till you understand what's really going on in their world that's motivating this company to choose potentially hiring your company for data center maintenance, for data center cleaning, and deciding instead to effectively fire the alternatives because they've hired your company. It's a very different way of approaching this, and it helps you to really understand your clients and your prospects' motivations. That's called the job to be done, sometimes abbreviated JTBD. And it's a product manager mindset that is actually very present in technology companies in and around digital infrastructure. It started in software companies, and it's permeated throughout a lot of the technology ecosystem and even traditional brick and mortar consumer packaged goods type of companies. I first learned about it years ago through the late professor at Harvard Business School, Clayton Christensen. Passed away a few years ago, but he popularized this whole idea that people need to really, businesses, companies, salespeople especially, need to really understand at a deep level what's going on in their world that motivates someone to want to hire a company like yours. And when I say way outside the technology ecosystem, the example that Professor Clayton Christensen would use had to do with studying McDonald's, the fast food giant that has a global presence now. And specifically, Professor Christensen and his assistants would go to McDonald's during morning rush hour, and they were hired by McDonald's to understand how to improve their milkshake business. If you ever saw the Founder movie, doesn't really have much to do with that, but you do know that the milkshakes have historically been a big part of the lore and the history of McDonald's. So anyway, they wanted to know how to improve milkshake sales. And they knew at the time that they were competing against other breakfast. They couldn't understand why people were buying milkshakes for breakfast. They really wanted to dig into that because were they competing against coffee? Were they competing against bananas? Were they competing against bagels? And he went through like this whole explanation of how McDonald's was able to dramatically improve the positioning and the marketing and the pricing and the sell-through rate of their milkshakes by better understanding the real reason why people were choosing to buy a milkshake to consume during their morning commute. And I think if I remember correctly, it had to do with like the viscosity of the drink and how it took them a long time to consume, and it helped them get through the boredom of a really long, tedious commute, a whole host of reasons. But at any rate, the moral of the story with all of this is for a company that does data center maintenance and cleaning, that's the positioning that you're allowing the marketplace to assign to you, but it doesn't have to be the positioning that your company would have going forward. And it's entirely possible that you still continue to provide principally data center maintenance and cleaning services, but you may decide to position this and explain this and market it and bundle this and sell this quite differently when you really dig into the motivations of your clients. And it's a product manager mindset. It is a buyer persona mindset. A buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of an ideal client based on some educated speculation and actual research. Most of the time, people that have been in the data center maintenance and cleaning business for a while have no shortage of educated speculation. The problem is your internal theories on why people buy your maintenance and cleaning may only be 20%, 25% of the overall answer of what's really going on in their world. I would encourage you to do actual research to come up with the other 75, 80% of the puzzle to figure out in their own words what is motivating someone like that and someone's like that. Perhaps there's different kind of stakeholders to originally seek out answers to questions, problems, solutions to problems, methodologies, processes that can help them close the gap on their goals, and to really, really understand for each kind of stakeholder that you sell maintenance and cleaning to, what is going on in their world. What are their biggest professional goals that they need to achieve that are relevant to the data center? What are the biggest things that are driving them nuts, their biggest challenges, their biggest stressors that are relevant to the data center? And once you're able to find the consensus on that, on their own words, it is a game changer for messaging, for positioning, for standing out, for competitive analysis, for competitive positioning, for differentiation. And it allows you to have an excuse to get in early and often with more of the right people in the right places at the right time and in the right context, so that they see you and your client-facing team as the be-all end-all experts of anything and everything having to do with this category and their needs in their company. And this is especially relevant in a self-propelled buyer's journey, because by default, if you're not doing this, what this means is most of your prospects and clients are going to do a ton of research before they get to you. They're going on search engines, social media, they're reading blogs, email newsletters, they're going to review websites, they're watching podcasts, YouTube videos, attending webinars, going to conferences, all this great stuff that helps them learn. The challenge is if you are completely absent from that process, your competitors essentially have the opportunity to get in early and often and significantly influence the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different options that are in front of them when it comes to data center maintenance and cleaning. However, if you're able to successfully pivot your client-facing team to be seen less like transaction-focused salespeople and more like consultants and teachers and subject matter experts and trusted advisors, it can have a game-changing impact on, instead of you spending all your time and energy chasing prospects and clients begging for meetings, it's actually the other way around. Your prospects and clients actually want to spend time with members of your client-facing team because they're learning so much from them. So the best way to compete in a price war is to figure out a way to circumvent the price war. How do you circumvent the price war to end up with much less price-sensitive buyers? You get in there early and often in a way that builds a strong emotional bond by educating and building trust, by making sure that you really understand the real deep, beyond surface level reasons for why a company needs data center maintenance and cleaning, and ask why and why and why. Ask why 5 times until you really, really get to the root of what's going on. From there, formulate a world-class education and event strategy that earns your way in to be invited into their side of the table long before they get to the point that they're going out looking for a vendor. This nearly guarantees that your company stays on the short list, but in many cases will knock most or nearly all of your competitors off the short list, because they'll start to truly understand what they really need to be thinking about, as opposed to the surface level commoditized definition of how your company currently looks like to external buyer personas. So that's what I would be thinking about for how a data center maintenance and cleaning company can compete in a price war. Next question up is, by the way, if you're getting good value from our data center go-to-market sales and marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button wherever you're watching. And if you have an idea for a question or a challenge that we should address in an upcoming episode, please leave that in the comments. Next up, how does a data center colocation provider find the right marketers who understand their business? How does a data center colocation provider find the right marketers who understand their business? So what's super interesting is this sounds like someone who owns a colocation business. And what I'm inferring here is that they have a hard time finding marketing professionals that understand what a colocation business does. And this could be marketing professionals that they're looking to hire as salaried full-time employees. This could be contractors. This could be agencies. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's really, really hard to do effective education and trust building. It's really hard to make all of the stuff happen with growth if you're struggling to find talent that truly understands your business. And it's not just a matter of understanding your business, it's a matter of understanding your most important buyer personas, businesses as well. Because as much as it's useful to understand what makes a co-location business tick, it's even more important to have extreme empathy about the reasons why certain categories of clients are interested in hiring and engaging and renting space, leasing, whatever you want to call it, from your co-location facility. So there's a couple of different learning curves. There's a learning curve from like a data center operator technology standpoint for your marketing and sales professionals to be especially helpful and relevant. And there is a learning curve that comes from explaining to the marketers that you're hiring, this is historically where we've done best. Look at our logos, look at our case studies, look at our CRM system. This is who we believe our primary buyer persona to be. This is who we believe our secondary buyer persona to be. And we've done the customer insight research, so we know in their own words what their biggest goals are and what their biggest challenges are. And we use that information, we use that insight to drive everything that we do with messaging, positioning, with websites, with email newsletters, with social posts, with ad campaigns, with conference investments, with educational webinars, with offline webinars, like lunch and learns and breakfast seminars and symposias. Everything is driven by a strong understanding of who our most important kinds of buyers are and what's going on in their world. So there's a baseline understanding of the business, and then there's an understanding of your client's business that comes into play. And of course, they also need to have the skills and competencies around many different areas within marketing. The smaller your company is, the more likely it is that they're going to have to wear a lot of different hats, take on a lot of different roles. The larger your company is, the bigger your marketing team is, the more you can afford to have certain levels of specialization. And a lot of companies and a lot of co-location companies, it's very common for a small marketing team, even a marketing team of one, to need to hire one or more contractors or agencies to close gaps on what's most important that can't be done by one person from a bandwidth perspective or skills and expertise perspective. But at the end of the day, the best way to find people that understand co-location is to look for people that have historically worked in co-location or adjacent to co-location. And the adjacent part in the ecosystem is what opens up a much wider part of your recruiting funnel for all of this. So think about among data center operators, among technology companies, facilities companies, construction and real estate companies, capital companies. We track like 52 different kinds of companies that sell to or partner with data center operators and enterprise data center providers, in addition to the 4 or 5 different kinds of data center operators. That means you have a couple dozen different kinds of business models where it's highly likely that you can find marketing talent that's at least somewhat aware of what a data center operator, what a co-location operator does. It could be someone that's worked in telecommunications, it could be someone that's worked in cybersecurity, it could be someone that's worked for a battery backup company, it could be someone that worked for some facet of data center real estate, it could be someone that did something related to compliance or the financial side of digital infrastructure. There's a lot of different business models where marketers could potentially have had significant exposure to what a data center operator like a co-location company does. Managed service providers, channel partners of co-location providers can also be a great resource where, for depending on the target market for an MSP, a managed service provider, as much as like 20-25% of their revenue could be coming from clients that need co-location space. So that person, in the course of growing an MSP business, running marketing for an MSP business, would at least have basic, perhaps even intermediate level familiarity with your business model. So when you understand all of these ecosystem opportunities, there's a lot you can do. The second part of it is you could also look to someone that's worked in co-location in a role that's adjacent to marketing that may want to transition into marketing. For example, someone that worked as a sales development rep that's tired of the grind of doing outbound or responding to inbound leads could be a fantastic resource to be repurposed into a full stack marketer for a co-location company. Someone that's worked in product or support or in a network operations center in a co-location company that's really good at doing like knowledge base articles and really good at doing explainer videos could be fantastic to repurpose into a marketer role. So when you think about the adjacent business models and the adjacent job functions to both a co-location operator business and marketing within there, all of a sudden you open up a much wider part of the funnel. That said, for successfully positioning your company to educate and build trust, you at some point will want to have a standardized like curriculum that you use to onboard new employees, especially onboarding all the employees that are in client-facing roles. And you also should likely think about upskilling, professional development, cross-training kind of opportunities, because in a self-propelled buyer's journey, marketing is going to carry a much bigger load, much bigger responsibility than they ever have in the past. In a self-driven buyer's journey, your prospects and clients don't want to meet your sales team till they're like 83% of the way through their buyer's journey. That's so different than as recently as 10 years ago, when prospects and clients would meet with salespeople when they were only about halfway through that buyer's journey. So what that means, it's incredibly important for your marketers to figure out creative ways to continue staying in front of your most important prospects and clients throughout their research and decision-making process. Think about like the 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. The better job you can do at owning as many of those 28 touch points, so your best prospects and clients are spending a ton of time with your marketers and your account executives, your whole client-facing team, the better job you're going to do at accelerate not only sales cycle acceleration, but position branding, and at the end of the day, winning the kind of clients that you really want to win. This is a long game. Another very creative strategy that you can use from a marketer perspective for a co-location business is to double dip around customer insight research. In other words, there's like basic customer insight research that you would do for documenting your buyer personas. However, a lot of the same people that you'd want to talk to for developing buyer personas could also be fantastic for interviewing in a podcast or interviewing on a panel webinar. So while you're getting this great customer insight research, you're also creating evergreen content that helps you attract and educate and build trust with more people that are just like the ones you're interviewing. In aggregate, it helps you to see trends and patterns. It also can provide social proof. It also provides deeper relationship building with your existing prospects, with your existing clients. So there's a lot of benefits to double and triple dipping on content creation and customer insight research that helps to really grow the impact of marketing in a co-location business. I think there's also a lot of cases where marketing is being boxed into being seen as an order taker of the sales team, where they're being very reactive, when in reality, there's an enormous unlock that happens from allowing marketing to support your entire company, your account managers, your product managers, your channel partnership managers. So they're not just the gopher, they're not just the order taker of the sales team. So those are some of the considerations that I would think about for a data center co-location provider that wants to find the right marketers who truly understand their business. We're going to take a quick break for a quick message from our sponsor. And when we come back, we'll tackle 3 more of the biggest challenges for data center go-to-market sales and marketing.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Welcome back to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. And if you're getting great value from this week's show, make sure that you hit the like button. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that we should address in an upcoming show, feel free to drop that into the comments. So what is up next? Next, we're going to talk about how to get in front of data center real estate, DCRE investors. How to get in front of data center real estate investors. This is a great question, and one that I don't think enough people in the data center ecosystem are really asking. Because when it comes to how the data center ecosystem is organized, you have like the operators, the technology and the facilities companies, and you have like the construction and real estate and capital markets kinds of companies. And especially when you get deep into construction and real estate and capital markets, some of the largest companies in this space are doing a pretty good job with content marketing and thought leadership and sales enablement that gets them out in front in a way that educates and builds trust to be seen as the go-to experts in this space. But once you get past the largest of the large companies in those space, in each of those three segments, there tends to be a really severe drop-off in investments in anything having to do with content and thought leadership and educational events, and really all of the things that are super relevant to the self-driven buyer's journey, where 83% of the game is over before you meet prospects and clients. So when it comes to like thinking about who are the strong adopters and the early adopters and who's really aggressively using content and expertise and being seen as a trusted advisor as a strong competitive weapon, the operators and the technology companies in most cases have been there at least a decade already. Most of the facilities companies have also been there for several years. In a lot of cases, the construction companies and especially the real estate companies and the really smaller investors tend to be huge laggards, which is crazy because it's all the same people that you're marketing and selling to that have these strong preferences. So you see a lot of people in this space leaning very heavily on the concept of a door opener, where you're hiring a person specifically for the contacts that they bring to the table, and you're incredibly dependent on that person, which doesn't scale. And it makes it really hard to forecast, and it makes it really hard to grow a team around that. And you end up with the same kind of hire, which may or may not be compatible with the culture that you want to be building in your company. So at the end of the day, for reaching data center real estate investors, it really is just another buyer persona, or perhaps it's 2 or 3 different buyer personas, depending on the nature of the kind of investors that you want to reach. There's VC companies, venture capital, there's private equity investors, institutional investors. Then there could be perhaps more retail investors. There could be analysts. There could be different stakeholders that are really important for you to get in front of. But this is pattern recognition. This is understanding where historically have you done best when you look at the kind of investors that have wanted in on your data center properties on your portfolio in the past. Once you know that, it's a lot easier to prioritize into having a primary and a secondary buyer persona. And just like anywhere else in the ecosystem, among your investors and how you segment your investors, what are their biggest goals that they need to do professionally, they're trying to achieve individually, that their team's trying to achieve, that their company needs to achieve, and what are they frustrated with most? What do they struggle with the most? And the better job you can do at showing up early and often in a way that educates and builds trust with these categories of stakeholders, with these categories of decision makers, the better job you're going to do at reaching data center real estate investors. Because in the case of like a private equity firm, venture capital firm, something like that, there almost certainly are certain kinds of people within that company that are most interested in what you're looking to get in front of them, your investment opportunity and your digital infrastructure. And once you know the consensus on what's going on in that person's world, what they're struggling with the most, what they need to achieve in order to get a promotion, to get a big bonus. It becomes a lot easier for you to figure out what your content and what your educational event strategy is going to be around earning your way in. So you're seen as an expert in the space and not just a middle intermediary that's trying to nag your way into a meeting. Because in a digital first world, in a self-propelled buyer's journey, whenever someone in that role that's like an analyst for one of those firms needs information, they're not waiting for someone like you to show up. They're not waiting for next year's conference. Where do you think they're going? They're going to a search engine. They're going to a chat bot. They're going to Perplexity, Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, Google, Bing. They're asking questions of their peers on LinkedIn, in groups and on certain hashtags. They're texting their friends. They're attending webinars. They're attending conferences. They're watching podcasts. They're watching YouTube videos. They're consuming people's LinkedIn posts, all that stuff. Because at the end of the day, we now have empowered buyers. They don't need to depend on you necessarily to get access to information as an information gatekeeper. There's lots of different ways they can get access to this information. So in order to earn your way in, you really do need to be seen more as a teacher and a consultant and a trusted advisor, rather than just a salesperson that's trying to beg your way in for a pitch meeting around your data center related investments. So that's how I would approach getting in front of data center real estate investors, is really understand what's top of mind for them, their biggest goals and challenges, where they hang out online and offline, and figuring out a way that you can show up in those places, in the right places at the right time, for the right people, and most of all, in the right context, so that you're seen as an expert on data center investments and not just someone that wants to nag them until they begrudgingly take a meeting with you. Because it's super important to earn your way into as many of the typical 28 touch points as possible between complete stranger and purchase decision. And the only way you're going to do that is to successfully reposition, repackage, pivot your professional branding to be seen more as the go-to expert in this space. Next question up is, how can a colocation provider compete against big cloud providers with infrastructure, disaster recovery, backup, and networking services? How does a colocation provider compete against big cloud providers with infrastructure, disaster recovery, backup, and networking as a service? That's a fantastic question. When we talk about big cloud providers, I'm going to read between the lines here and think that to a certain degree, they're probably competing with the hyperscalers. And that's a really tall order to go head to head with these giant multi-billion-dollar companies. What it largely comes down to is, for a smaller company to compete in that context with huge companies, is you're largely looking for people that have trusted their business, their digital infrastructure, their disaster recovery, their networking, their backup as a service, all of that, to one of the big companies in the past, and they had a crappy experience. And because of that, now they're looking to go to largely the other extreme. They're looking to go to a much smaller company where they can get to know your technical staff, when they can get to know your NOC staff, where they can talk with your system engineers, where they have a direct pipeline into your leadership company, perhaps even all the way up to the C-level of your company. So when it comes to competing with that, recognizing that they're buying you and your team just as much as they're buying those services, as they're leasing, as they're subscribing to those kinds of services. So with that in mind, it's generally a really, really good idea to figure out what's top of mind for these kinds of buyers. For starters, let's define who we're talking about and what they care most about. So make sure that you have a well-documented ideal client profile, geographically where these ideal clients are located, what size companies they're from. In other words, what company, what kind of prospect, what kind of ideal client is too small, meaning they can't afford your minimums, or so large that they may be prohibitively difficult to be able to service. So a range of employee headcount and what kinds of industries they tend to be in. Why is that especially relevant? Because when it comes to cloud services, infrastructure, DR, backup, networking. For certain kinds of businesses like financial services or healthcare, government, education, what have you, there's definitely compliance and certification requirements that come up that if your company has, great. If your company doesn't, you're probably automatically disqualified. So let's make sure that we're crystal clear about where these prospects and clients are located, how big or how small their company sizes are, and what their companies actually do, their industries, their business models, their verticals. Once we know that, we can build a target account list of the ideal clients that we want to get in front of, specific company names. And once we know that, we need to get really specific on who the stakeholders are in these companies that we need to build relationships with, that we need to educate and build trust with. These we'll call our buyer personas. A buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of an ideal client, of an ideal person, an ideal stakeholder that you want to build a relationship with based on some actual research and some select educated speculation. Most companies that get lazy about this just do the speculation and don't do the actual research. I'd encourage you that if you really want to stand out and compete with these huge companies, do the research. It can be face-to-face, it can be on Zoom calls, it can be through surveys, it can be through studying what they say about themselves, their LinkedIn profiles, and their search footprint about specific stakeholders. But make no mistake, you need their own words, not what you think their words are, but what their own words actually are. What are the words that come out of their mouths when it comes to how they self-articulate who they are and what they care about? What are their biggest goals? What's the consensus around that? What are the 6, 8, 10 bullet points that they need to accomplish professionally? What their team needs to accomplish, what their company needs to accomplish. And the flip side of that, what are they struggling with the most? What are their biggest frustrations? What are their biggest challenges? And again, the consensus on that in their own words. That's how you meet them where they actually are, not where you'd like them to be in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but where they actually are now. And it's incredibly important to meet them on their own turf where they actually are now, because in a self-driven buyer's journey, by default, they're going to ignore you during most of the journey until they're almost ready to buy. And by then, if you haven't had a chance to educate and build trust with those kinds of stakeholders, in most cases, it's too late because they spent all of the time with someone that you compete against. And that company, their client-facing team, has done all the education and trust building. They were in on a lot of those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. And because of that, they had a dramatic impact on the criteria that this particular prospect or client used to evaluate all the options that are in front of them for co-location, for cloud, for infrastructure, for DR, for backup, for networking. So your goal should be to get found as early as possible, as often as possible, by the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context. So you get out of the vendor box and your client-facing team members are seen more like teachers and consultants and subject matter experts, trusted advisors, perhaps even thought leaders. That's what's going to allow you to not only have a major impact on your prospects, on your future clients, criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different options in front of them, but that's what's going to give you a deep emotional bond with your prospects and clients that many times knocks other companies off of the short list. In some cases, it could knock all of the companies off the short list and you're the last person standing when they get to the decision stage. But at the absolute minimum, you're guaranteed to stay on the short list if you execute this well. And because of this will help you not only compete against companies your own size, but compete against companies much larger than yours. A lot of it, and the big challenge for a lot of companies, is getting very specific about where you can win. Because you can't, especially as a small company, is wildly unrealistic to say that you're going to sell to everyone. If your ICP, if your ideal client profile, if your addressable market is so wide that it seems like you're trying to boil the ocean, it's not going to happen. Even huge data center operators are very specific on their who we help pages about certain industries and certain kinds of solutions. And when you look at the job titles among their sales and marketing folks, their account managers, they're generally very, very specific about the segments that they're going after. The more resource constrained you are, the more critical it is to pick your battles and get really specific about where they're located, their company sizes, what they do, and who these stakeholders are that you need to educate and build trust with. So the key with all of this is to attract early, engage early, nurture early, and just spend a lot more time, a lot more touch points helping to shape the criteria on a one-to-many basis, not on a one-to-one basis. That gets prohibitively complex, complicated, too expensive for all but the largest enterprise accounts. But like email marketing, webinars, offline webinars should be a really, really, really important part of the playbook for competing with large cloud companies for anything and everything having to do with infrastructure, disaster recovery, backup, and networking. This brings us to our final question for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, which is, how do you scale a data center industry-specific financial audit and assurance services firm? So your company provides data center industry-specific financial audit and assurance services. This sounds like it could be very similar to a CPA firm, a certified public accounting firm, or a chartered accounting firm, or whatever it's called in your particular region of the world. How do you scale financial audit and assurance services for the data center industry? I'd look at that as a two-pronged question. The first part is how we scale the services delivery. And that's going to be an operations kinds of question that will likely involve a lot of operations thought, technology thoughts, business model thoughts. And for that, you're going to need someone who actually is an expert on financial audits and assurance services, which almost certainly is like a CPA, CFO kind of type, or chief investment officer or something like that with experience in the data center industry. That's a whole business model consideration part that gets into recruiting. It gets into continuing professional education, onboarding, cross-training, all of that stuff around building a profitable practice targeting the data center industry. What I'm going to talk about is the go-to-market side of that, how we run world-class marketing and sales enablement and nurturing and account management for those kinds of clients. And in order for us to successfully tackle the commercialization part of that, we need to recognize that the CFOs that you're largely targeting in these companies, the board members that you may be targeting in these companies, are just like all the other people in the data center industry that you're likely familiar with, meaning that they tend to be really highly educated. They tend to be somewhat cynical. Just like everyone else in the data center industry, they do a ton of research on their own before they get to initial meetings with you. So they're asking questions about the data center industry at the intersection of financial audits and assurance services. They're asking these questions on search engines, on their LLMs, on their generative AI tools, their Copilots, their ChatGPTs, their Perplexities, their Claudes, their Geminis. They're asking those questions there. They're posting questions to their peers on LinkedIn and LinkedIn groups. They're consuming content from their peers in LinkedIn groups. They're attending educational events like webinars and conferences and symposias to learn about what's going on in the industry, especially ones that are relevant to financial and investment professionals. They're watching YouTube videos. There's probably some podcasts that they're tuned into. And it's really, really important that you get hyper specific about who they are and what they care about. And for that, it's a very similar kind of go-to-market playbook as for any kind of business. In other words, we need to know, for starters, for these financial executives who are going to make the decisions around who to engage for financial audits and advisory services, what kind of companies do they work for? This is your basic ideal client profile. Geographically, where are they located? That's a huge issue for financial services, for digital infrastructure, for data center companies, because we know compliance and reporting requirements vary tremendously depending on where those clients are located. So nail down your geographic targets. What region, what continent, what country, what state, whatever it is you're targeting. And that's going to be a function of your talent, where your expertise is, where your company is licensed, all the post-purchase stuff, business model that I talked about a few moments ago that has to do with your operations and technology and decisions on what services to provide and who to provide those services for. Once you have nailed down geography, you'll want to get a little bit more specific on what size companies they're from. In other words, like how big do they need to be to afford your minimums? And at what point are they so large that it's very unlikely that your firm would be able to be the one that they would choose for financial audit and advisory services because they might want a giant firm. Now, granted, if you work for a huge company, if you work for like a Deloitte or a PwC or KPMG or EY or something like that, you for sure don't have those kind of barriers for much smaller companies that provide outsourced financial audit and advisory services. Yeah, there may be some natural ceilings where it's just prohibitively difficult for you to be the one that's providing financial audit or advisory services to a massive company like Digital Realty or Equinix or something like that. So guardrails around size and also guardrails around industries. And the industry concentration is something that's very well known within like accounting firms, financial services firms, because they organize their practices around this. This is why in accounting firms, both in the US and globally, it's very common to see practices organized by vertical or industry. So you see like in the US, for example, you see CPA teams that are specialists in like manufacturing or hospitality or technology, or in this particular case, digital infrastructure. So along the same lines, while there's specializations on your team, there's going to likely be specializations in your ideal client profile where you have unique capabilities at the intersection of digital infrastructure and or certain kind of enterprise kind of clients within their particular portfolio. But for many cases, like telecommunications, technology companies, information technology may be a good enough segment to start when it comes to targeting and finding the right clients. So geographically, where they're located, what company size is most relevant, and what industries are most relevant. Then the job functions. Is this a CFO? Is this a VP of finance? Is this a compliance officer? Is this a board member? Or is it all of the above? Is there an IT leader that needs to get looped into these conversations at some point? You'll be in a much better position to answer that by looking at where you've been most successful in the past. When you look at your CRM, when you look at your client list and you figure out what's worked best for you in the past. But at the end of the day, just like any other company in the digital infrastructure ecosystem, your goal is to intercept these financial executives as early as possible in their research and decision-making process so you can take a really concerted, trusted advisor, teacher, subject matter expert, consultant kind of view with them throughout their full buyer's journey. So understanding who they are and what they care about, their biggest goals and challenges will be instrumental for you coming up with educational content strategy, educational events that gives those financial executives, that gives those compliance officers, that gives those board members a reason to want to spend time with you, because they don't just see you as a professional services firm that provides audit and advisory. They see you as the be-all, end-all expert at the intersection of audits and advisory for data centers, for digital infrastructure related businesses. And you typically will demonstrate that by having a fantastic blog and email newsletters and downloadable research reports and planning templates and educational webinars, offline events, perhaps podcasts, speaking at conferences, publishing, all the normal things that someone would do that's trying to let the world know, one, that they have the strong expertise, and two, has strong customer insight to get found as early on as possible so that you earn a seat on the virtual side of the table with them throughout the full journey. And that's the key part with this whole thing, is that so many companies in the data center ecosystem are thinking that there's a magic decision maker. In a self-guided buyer's journey, there's very rarely a single decision maker anymore. It's more than likely a decision committee. And even if you manage to get a few minutes in front of the person who will ultimately be signing off on that, people are so risk averse now. They're going to kick it back to their team and they're going to say, this sounds good, but yeah, go talk to Sue, go talk to Bob, meet with the team, talk about your approach to all of this, your methodology, your processes. And if they're on the same page, yeah, loop me back in and we'll talk about potentially working together. So that's thing number one, is to recognize that in a self-driven buyer's journey, it's a decision committee. This is why having a really strong idea on who those buyer personas are at specific companies is more important than ever. Second, in a self-driven buyer's journey, we need to stay with those decision makers and that decision committee throughout most of their touch points. And the way this is typically done is great segmentation, great personalization, extreme relevance to who they are and what they care about, that starts by having a really strong grasp on their biggest goals, their biggest challenges, and consistently demonstrating that in everything that you do going forward, so that your prospects and future clients, these finance execs, these investment officers, these compliance officers, these board members, actually want to spend significant amounts of their time with members of your team, because they're getting so much value in learning from them, that it is a natural that, because you've done the relationship building and the strong emotional bonds and the educating and the trust building throughout that full journey, that not only does your practice, does your company, does your firm stay on that short list, in many cases you will actually be knocking competitive alternatives off the short list, because they're spending so much time with your company. And they're learning so much from your company, because you've seen the pattern recognition of what's working best for an individual in a company just like theirs. There's no reason for them to look elsewhere. So they get to the decision stage, and many times you win by default as the last person standing that's spent all of this great time with them. So that's how I would approach kind of the intersection of accounting and financial services and digital infrastructure, or specifically how to scale data center industry specific financial audits and assurance services in and around data centers, digital infrastructure companies, critical facilities kind of companies. So that brings us to our final question for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. To make sure that you stay up to date on new educational events and resources just like this, make sure that you're subscribed to our Data Center Sales and Marketing email newsletter that comes to your inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. I'm Joshua Feinberg for DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. Wish you great success and look forward to seeing you back again next week. Take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.